It is widely believed that relationship violence is something you won't miss. We believe that violence is something obvious. We tend to think that violence is only when a husband who used to be perfect all of a sudden shows up at a door with a gun in his hand. And we often hear, no, this isn't violence. It's just an ordinary quarrel. But how can you tell one from the other? Because often violence is not only physical, and most of the wounds it leaves are invisible to the eye. Other forms of violence can include sexual, economic, and psychological violence. Partner violence can be difficult to recognize for a number of reasons. First, because it develops gradually, from sporadic episodes of less violent behavior to regular and severe violence. You love a person, but after 6 months of a relationship, all of a sudden he gets drunk and yells at you for several hours in a row because he got jealous and thinks that you're cheating on him. No worries, you say to yourself, it happens all the time. Anyway, do I have to go packing just because of a single abusive episode? I mean, we made up so quickly in the morning. Then the next time, he smashes some furniture. Then he breaks an object that is important to you. Then he grabs your shirt, but swears that it happened by accident. And now he's grabbing you by the hair, or even worse, he's strangling you or hitting you. Sure, it would be easier to recognize abuse in your relationship if your partner grabbed you or began choking you only just a couple of months of dating. Then it would be easier to decide and you would leave him without any hesitation. But during the time that the violence was gradually gaining momentum, you seem to have prepared yourself for something harder. You have grown used to it. You have developed a tolerance for violence. Secondly, it can be difficult for you to define abuse because the abuser is doing his best at making his partner feel guilty or even seem crazy. These behaviors are known as victim blaming and gaslighting. When the partner gently says, "Honey, you're just making all this up," and he says this half an hour after pounding the wall and yelling, then this is gaslighting. And when he says, "Yes, I pounded the wall, but it was you who made me," then this is victim blaming. Thirdly, being in an abusive relationship, you may not consider your partner an abuser because violence comes in a cycle. After an outburst of violence, physical or emotional, a reconciliation occurs, the so-called honeymoon. A partner can apologize, swear eternal love, give gifts, and carry you in his arms. Looking at such behavior, you might think, but can an abuser really behave like this? The answer is yes. Abusers can and do behave like this. After a period of peace, there is a period of increasing tension and then a new outbreak of aggression. There may be a large number of such cycles, but on average, each subsequent cycle is shorter than the previous one, and each subsequent attack of violence is more severe than the previous one. Now that we've looked at why violence can be difficult to identify, now let's look at the essence and definition of violence. Violence is the use of physical force or power that causes or may result in physical or psychological harm of another person. Pay attention to this. Even the most obvious physical violence is always an expression of power and superiority, like any other form of violence. Relationship violence is not an act. It is a process and system based on dehumanization and gaining control over an individual. And manifestations of control will become the main marker of violence for you. There are various forms of control in the system of violence. They can be, for example, instructions on how to dress and with whom to socialize. Abusers love narrowing down the network of your relationships with other people. In the end, Makes it difficult for you to leave the abuser because there's no one else to turn to for support. But the abuser triumphs, assuring you that no one needs you except for him. Although not so long ago, he himself forbade you to communicate with bad friends and bad girlfriends. Does this resonate with your experience? Economic violence is another form of abuse. It can manifest itself in the control of your spending. All of a sudden, you have no say about where you get to spend your money. This happens especially if you're not working. When a partner blackmails you by not giving you money for something, if this is his way of making you obey, then this is undoubtedly violence. By the way, very often the abuser himself persuades the partner to leave the job. Technically, this is presented as a concern, but the real goal here is to increase control over the victim. Violence is always based on an imbalance of power and strength. So, in general, all forms of violence flourish in a situation of economic inequality. A partner can instill in you the idea of your uselessness and worthlessness because you do not earn anything. Or he can devalue your housework, your contribution to the overall household budget. Sometimes, even with a comparable income, he can make you believe that you're not capable of managing the money by yourself. And he can even take your salary in order to blackmail you later. Now let's turn to sexual violence. Sexual violence is not often associated with partner relationships, but in most abusive relationships, it is also present. Ask yourself, do you sometimes have sex with your partner when you don't feel like it? Just to avoid his resentment. Or he insists on making you do something that you're not really comfortable with. Perhaps he neglects your pleasure and you feel like an inflatable doll that he is using for satisfying his needs. Do not ignore this. This is the definition of sexual assault. Psychological violence can be present either as a component of any other type of violence or by itself. This can be regular neglect of your requests and needs, insults, and that includes insulting jokes, by the way, rejection of your appearance and character, outbursts of anger, humiliation of you in front of your mutual acquaintances, becoming offended and then ignoring you for several days until you apologize. Psychological abuse can be very painful. It can be devastating, even though everyone around you may tell you that it's just a trifle. Well, tell them not to devalue your experiences. It's not a trifle. If you're in an abusive relationship, your partner is likely to devalue your feelings and needs. He does it routinely. For example, he may say that you're always exaggerating and that he's enraged by your tears because you're behaving like a selfish baby. Well, that's his problem, and you have to respect your feelings and express them as you like. Unfortunately, often the only way to end the abuse in a relationship is to get out of that relationship. There are special psychological programs for working with abusers, but most of them do not want to change, and they join those programs only when the question of divorce or restraining orders come into effect. Remember that you cannot force your partner to change, but you can take care of your own safety and psychological well-being. At the same time, scary statistics show that most murders in partnerships occur after a woman reports leaving. Often, violence in the form of stalking and threats continue after the relationship ends. When you leave, the abuser feels that he has lost control and wants to regain it at any cost. This is why, if you do decide to leave, it is vital for you to carefully consider your safety plan and your getaway plan. In advance, gather the minimum of things you will need in order to leave without any delay in a situation of danger. Talk to your friends in advance and make an agreement with those who will be ready to support you when you decide to leave. Find violence relief services and crisis centers in your city and keep their contacts close at hand. If you are financially dependent on the abuser, then try to plan this aspect as well in advance. Put some money away. When you are in an abusive relationship, you may feel as if you are unable to survive without a partner. Your self-esteem plummets, and you lose ability to make independent decisions. You believe that no one else will love you. And that's understandable because even in the absence of physical abuse, you can develop PTSD with insomnia, constant fear, and bouts of anger. It can be really difficult for you to separate yourself from an abusive partner. But remember that it's only your assumption. It's only an illusion that you cannot cope with living by yourself, that you cannot make your own decisions. You can survive by yourself. You can make your own decisions. You can, period. To make sure it's true, ask yourself the question, what exactly do I get from this relationship? And if your answer is that you hope that everything will be fine again, that your partner will change, then think again and make the plan of escaping in advance. Or you may feel sorry for your partner, believing that he cannot survive without you. Is that your case? As soon as you move away from him, he suddenly starts sobbing from loneliness at your door and threatens to commit suicide or to die from a sudden heart attack. Well, be careful. Those are also actions aimed at regaining control over you, and this is manipulation. If you're very worried, then share with him the contacts of psychological assistance services. After all, help can come from any person. It doesn't have to be you. It's strange that the first one on this list is someone who decided to separate from him because of abuse, isn't it? After getting out of an abusive relationship, psychotherapy may be needed to restore your psychological balance. Besides, you may have developed a deep mindset about being unable to cope with life or be valuable without any relationship. This can also be a subject of therapy in order to make your new relationship more satisfying and safer. No matter what kind of violence your partner uses against you, you're probably used to feeling a mixture of fear, shame, and guilt. Therefore, it is important to understand this. The person who uses violence against another person is to blame for that violence. Nothing you do, even cheating or leaving, is an excuse for violence.